For months, Zimbabwe has been locked in one of the most heated constitutional debates in recent memory. And just when many people thought the process might slow down, something happened that has completely changed the political conversation. ZANU-PF is now pushing Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3, commonly known as CAB3, even further. And according to Justice Minister Ziyambi, once the bill reaches President Emmerson Mnangagwa's desk, the Constitution requires that it be signed within 21 days. At almost the same time, President Mnangagwa recalled members of parliament for an extraordinary sitting of the National Assembly to consider amendments that were passed by the Senate last week. Suddenly, what once looked like another parliamentary debate now feels like a race against time. And many Zimbabweans are asking one question: is CAB3 now unstoppable? Or could something still happen before the final signature? Stay with us until the end.
Good afternoon, Zimbabwe. We are at Parliament Building awaiting an extraordinary sitting of the National Assembly following the recall by His Excellency Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa to ensure that they come and consider the amendments made by the Senate last week. Some of the amendments made by Senate included the election of the president to be conducted by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission in accordance with the standing rules and orders of Parliament. The amendment of Section 101 of the Constitution, which deals with the succession in case of incapacitation or resignation of the sitting president, and the last acting president will be appointed to take charge until elections are done. The Senate gave powers to the Clerk of Parliament to call for the first sitting of Parliament after general elections. The Constitutional Amendment number 3 Bill 6, among other provisions, to lengthen the electoral cycle for the president, legislators, councillors from 5 to 7 years, while also giving power for the setting up of the Zimbabwe Delimitation Commission. Zimbabweans will be here at Parliament Building to continuously give you updates regarding what will be taking place in the National Assembly regarding the Constitutional Amendment number 3 Bill.
Because the final twist in this story could determine what happens next in Zimbabwe's political future. For weeks, the debate over CAB3 has refused to disappear. Everywhere people go, from the streets of Harare to Bulawayo, from market stalls to university campuses, from WhatsApp groups to social media platforms, the same discussion keeps coming back. Some believe this bill represents an important constitutional process that Parliament has every right to complete. Others believe it raises serious constitutional questions that deserve even greater public debate before becoming law. Regardless of which side people support, one thing has become impossible to ignore. CAB3 is now dominating Zimbabwe's political landscape. Then came the latest development. Instead of allowing Parliament to wait until its normal sitting schedule, President Emmerson Mnangagwa recalled the National Assembly for an extraordinary sitting. That decision immediately caught the attention of political observers across the country. Extraordinary sittings are not called every day, and when they happen, people naturally begin asking why the matter cannot wait. According to the parliamentary process, members of Parliament have been called back to consider amendments that were passed by the Senate during its previous sitting. While this may sound like a normal legislative procedure, the political significance is much bigger than many first imagined. The moment news of the extraordinary sitting began spreading, speculation exploded. Some interpreted the recall as a clear sign that government wants the legislative process completed without unnecessary delay. Others argued that the constitutional process is simply moving from one required stage to another. But regardless of the interpretation, the timing has added fresh energy to an already controversial debate. Suddenly, CAB3 no longer feels like a distant political issue, it now feels like something moving closer to its final destination. If you're enjoying this analysis and you want balanced updates on Zimbabwe's biggest political stories, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we break down the developments that everyone is talking about, and the story you're watching today could have lasting implications for Zimbabwe's political future. Then, another statement began attracting even more attention. Justice Minister Ziyambi explained that once the bill is finally presented to President Mnangagwa, after completing the parliamentary stages, the Constitution provides that the President has 21 days to either sign it into law or return it to Parliament if there are constitutional concerns. That single statement immediately changed the public conversation. Instead of asking only whether CAB 3 would reach the president, many Zimbabweans started asking another question altogether. What happens during those 21 days? Some supporters believe the answer is straightforward. They argue that Parliament has followed constitutional procedures, the Senate has played its role, and once the bill reaches the president, the process should naturally be completed. To them, this is how constitutional democracy functions. Parliament debates, the Senate considers amendments, and the President performs the constitutional responsibility of either assenting to the bill or returning it for further consideration where appropriate. But critics remain unconvinced. They continue arguing that constitutional amendments should carry the confidence of the broader public and not simply rely on parliamentary numbers alone. Civil society organizations, constitutional commentators, and opposition voices have repeatedly called for greater transparency and wider public engagement whenever constitutional changes are proposed. For them, CAB 3 is about much more than legal language. It is about the long-term direction of Zimbabwe's governance. As these arguments continue, one thing has become increasingly clear. Zimbabwe is not just witnessing another ordinary political disagreement. The country is watching two very different visions of constitutional governance collide in full public view. Every statement issued by political leaders creates another wave of debate. Every parliamentary announcement generates another round of questions. Every procedural step is now being closely examined by supporters and critics alike. Meanwhile, inside political circles, analysts are paying close attention to the speed of events. The Senate has already completed its consideration and passed amendments. Now, the National Assembly has been recalled to consider those Senate amendments. Once that process is completed, attention will naturally shift to the President's constitutional role. The sequence of events suggests that the legislative process is entering one of its most important stages. That is exactly why emotions are running high. Supporters say the government is demonstrating commitment to completing constitutional business efficiently and according to established parliamentary procedures. They argue that unnecessary delays create uncertainty and undermine legislative effectiveness. From their perspective, Parliament exists to debate laws, and once debate is concluded, the constitutional process should continue. Opponents see the same developments through a completely different lens. They believe that the pace of the process leaves many Zimbabweans with unanswered questions. They argue that constitutional reforms deserve extensive public participation because their effects can extend far beyond one parliament or one administration. For them, the issue is not simply whether procedures are being followed. The issue is whether the public has been sufficiently heard. That difference in perspective explains why CAB 3 has become one of the country's most closely watched political issues. It is no longer just a bill moving through Parliament. It has become a symbol of competing ideas about constitutional change, democratic participation, and political accountability. Every Zimbabwean seems to have an opinion, and those opinions continue to shape conversations across the nation. Then comes another question that has begun gaining attention. What if the extraordinary sitting itself sends a political message? Some commentators believe recalling Parliament demonstrates urgency and determination to complete unfinished legislative business. Others caution against reading too much into the decision, pointing out that extraordinary sittings are recognized parliamentary mechanisms used whenever important business needs attention outside the normal calendar. Whatever interpretation people choose, the recall has undoubtedly intensified public interest. Across Zimbabwe, reactions continue to pour in. Supporters of the process argue that elected representatives were chosen to make legislative decisions and should therefore be allowed to carry out their constitutional responsibilities. Critics respond that constitutional amendments affect every citizen and therefore deserve the broadest possible consultation before becoming law. Neutral observers simply want clarity. They want to understand exactly what CAB 3 changes, why those changes are considered necessary, and how they could affect Zimbabwe moving forward. One of the most fascinating aspects of this debate is that both sides claim they are acting in Zimbabwe's best interests. Government supporters say constitutional stability depends on allowing institutions to function without obstruction. Opponents insist constitutional legitimacy depends on ensuring citizens feel included in major national decisions. That is why this conversation has become so emotional. It is no longer only about legal provisions. It is about trust, confidence, and the future direction of the country. As Parliament prepares for its extraordinary sitting, all eyes will be on what happens inside the National Assembly. Will members of Parliament quickly consider and approve the Senate's amendments? Will further debate emerge? Will new political arguments be raised before the bill moves to its next stage? These are the questions dominating political discussions across Zimbabwe today.